Okay.
We continue today with Devarim, Perek Zayin, Deuteronomy chapter 7. And again, we're in the middle. We just had the Aseret HaDibrot and the Shema Yisrael, so a lot of very important passages and well-known phrases for us. And chapter 7 begins, Ki aviacha Adonai Elohecha el haaretz asher atava shama lirishta, v'nashal goyim rabim mipanecha hachiti v'girgashi v'amori v'haknani v'haprizi v'achivi v'ayevusi shiva goyim rabim v'atzumim mimeka. So God, as Moshe has said numerous times, right? Again, always trying to bolster them, not wanting them to worry. When God brings you into the land of Israel, you will possess and you will uproot, you will defeat the 7 nations, Chiti, Geshuri, Girgashi, Amori, Kani, Prizi, Chivi, Yevusi, nations that are larger than you. It's just interesting to note, just as an aside, right? According to the traditional understanding, there's 600,000 Jewish men between the ages of 20 and 60 who leave Egypt, which makes out a population people estimate about 3 million. It's hard to believe that each of these 7 tribes are larger than the 3 million people. We know how, I'll get back into the chapter in a second. We know how crowded Israel is today, and there are less than 21 million people living in the territory that is the state of Israel today. So just as an aside, something to think about. And God will give them to you. You will defeat them. You need to completely destroy them. You cannot give them any terms of peace. Don't marry with them. You cannot give your son to their daughter, and don't take their sons for your daughters. Because we know what's going to happen is your children will turn away from me. They will be influenced by these other nations and their gods, their idolatry. And then God says, Moshe says that God will blaze, and with his anger will come very quick. We know that the influence does happen. We've seen it before. There's the worry following the Egel HaZahav. That's the first time that God says you have to go and destroy all the nations in the land of Israel. Maybe there was an idea that maybe some sort of coexistence would have worked out okay, but Bnei Yisrael show that they're very easy to be influenced and to follow other gods. And so God repeats that here. Interestingly, in verse 2 is one of the places in the Torah that talks about the destruction of the 7 nations that were in the land of Israel. It's important to note that the rabbis wrote this mitzvah out of the Torah. That was a mitzvah that only applied to those 7 nations at the time that Yoshua led Bnei Israel into the land of Israel. It's not a mitzvah that applied when the Jews went back at the time of the Second Temple, when they got permission from Cyrus. It's not a mitzvah anymore in 1948. There's no mitzvah. There's no obligation to go and to commit some sort of horrific genocide. The rabbis understand that was only at that specific time and doesn't exist anymore. It's already in the Gemara, the Rambam paskins that way, etc., etc. Let's continue in verse 5. Pasuk Kim ko ta'asu lahem. This is what you should do to them. Mizbechoteim titotsu, matzevotam tishabeir, vashereim tigadeun ufsileitis rufun ba'esh. Destroy all of their idols. Why? Ki am kadosh ata, in verse 6, because you are a holy nation. La Adonai Elohecha. God has chosen, has selected you. And here we have a phrase that becomes somewhat problematic in the contemporary period, this idea of Bnei Israel being an Am Skula, and how that's translated. Treasure people. Many have throughout history have seen it as being somehow better. Bnei Israel is better. And that, of course, bothers a lot of people today. So different ways to understand it. Maybe you become better through the observance of Torah and mitzvah. Maybe it's not something that's genetically, maybe it's not something that you just get, but it's through the work that it happens that you can become a greater people by making yourself a more morally and ethically and living a life of meaning. Verse 7, Lo mirubchem mikol amim chashak Adonai bachem v'yivchar bachem ki atem hama'at mikol amim. God didn't choose you because you were the most numerous amongst the nation, because you are the smallest amongst the nations, right? I don't remember, but if you go back to the time of the Romans, they're like 1 million Jews or 2 million Jews. Maybe Rav Shmuel is here, remembers better historically. Based upon those numbers, there should be, $1.7 billion, 1.7 billion Jews There shouldn't be, 13 million Jews. We should have a humongous number of Jews that would probably make day school tuition cheaper and other things. And but that's not the case. We are a small people, and God chose us not because we were the biggest, but because we were a small. And why did He choose us? Because God favored you, because you would keep the oath which God made with your fathers. And we know this early on when God is about to destroy Sodom. He goes to Abraham and he says, I cannot hide from Abraham what I'm going to do to Sodom, because he's going to teach his children to do tzedakah umishpat. He's going to teach his descendants to act with righteousness and with justice. And that's why God took you out from Egypt, so that you would set up a society that would be just, a society that would be merciful and fair and caring. And know that God is steadfast, keeps His covenant to the 1,000th generation to those who keep the divine covenant. We saw this just yesterday. 2 days ago, this idea of God rewarding up to the 1,000th generation. What we have here, right? This is all a lot of Sefer Devarim is about a brit. It's about a covenant that we've made with God, and so we have to keep our part of the covenant. We have to show the love for God the same way we hope that God shows His love for us, because a covenant is a two-way agreement, and that's what's being stressed in these chapters. We're going back to Har Sinai, the Shema, how we show our love for the covenant, and the betrayal of the covenant is through worshiping idols, and that's something that we shouldn't do. Mishalem l'sonav el panav lavido lo yacher l'sono el panav yishalem lo. But those who deserve destruction, God rejects them, and God doesn't reject them slowly. It happens straight away. V'shamarta ta mitzvah v'yat hachukim v'yat hamishpatim asher anochi mitzavcha hayom la'asotam. And therefore, you should faithfully observe these mitzvot, which I am commanding for you to do. And that's a lot of like the language again of Devarim, Asher Anochi Mitzavcha, Asher Anochi Mitzavcha Hayom. We'll have that over and over again about Moshe commanding them and Moshe telling them to listen to God. If you're taking notes at home, we are now starting in verse 12. Parshat Ekev. V'haya Ekev tishmu'un et hamishpatim ha'ele ushpartem v'asitem otam v'shamar Adonai Elohecha lecha et habrit v'et hachesed asher nishpa la'avotecha. And if you obey these rules and observe them carefully, your God will maintain faithfully for you the covenant made on an oath with your fathers. And there's a comment made here. I don't know if it's here or it's back in the middle of Breshit. There's a midrashic idea that Avraham realized that there was a God when he was 3 years old. He lived to be 175 years old. And so 175 minus 3 is 172. I was good at math always. And Akev, the gematria of Akev is 172. That the same way Avram listened to God and followed God's path for 172 years. And it's there also in Breshit, because it says Akev asher shama Avraham bikoli. When God is talking to Yitzchak, he talks about the way that Avraham followed God. So here too, the illusion we can take as well, following the mitzvot in the same way that Avraham did, and then God will show us kindness for the covenant as He had shown, because we're continuing in the ways of Avraham. And if God will multiply us, He will bless us from the womb and the soil, the grain, the wine, the oil, everything that possibly could come out good or could be tragic. It's all going to grow and blossom beautifully. Baruch tiyeh mikol amim. We will be blessed above all the other nations. Lo ye'avcha akar v'akara uvem techa. There'll be no sterile male or female amongst you, or even amongst your livestock. They see Adonai mimcha chol cholin. God will push away all sickness, no COVID, no anything. V'chol madvei mitzrayim harei asher yadata lo yisimam bach unetanam b'chol sonecha. And any of the dreadful diseases of Egypt, those will no longer apply. You will not have to worry about those any longer. Those will be things of the past. I don't know here if it's a specific reference to maybe some of the things in the Makot, or it's just generally you were in a big society with a lot of people, and there was probably a lot more disease and strange things that the physicians at the time would have seen. Destroy the people that are there that God delivers to you. Do not show them any pity. And don't worship their gods, for that will be a trap for you. Maybe you're going to say to yourself, those nations, they're larger, they're bigger. How could I possibly defeat them? Lo tira mehem. Don't be afraid. We've had this a few times over the last number of chapters where God first said to Moshe, Lo tira, and Moshe said to Yehoshua, and he said to Bnei Israel, and we saw this expressed earlier again when we have the tribes of Reuven and Gad coming to Moshe. Moshe is very worried about the people being disheartened, the people being scared of having the sin of the spies 2.0. Don't be scared of them. Just remember what God did to Pharaoh, to Egypt. God could do anything. You were scared of the Egyptians with good reason. They tortured us, but the same way God, through the miracles, through his mighty hand, through his outstretched arm, delivered you and took you out of Egypt, that's what God will do to all of these other nations. So don't be scared. I know you are, but there's no reason. God will also send plagues against them until they are left in hiding because of you. Right there, all of them are going to be gone. They're not going to be a snare, a trap to you. You will be victorious. Don't be scared. Don't dread them. Because God is in your midst, a great and mighty and awesome God. God will remove these people from you little by little. It won't happen too fast. Lest the wild beasts multiply to hurt you, right? There'll be nobody around and the animals will come after you. And what's interesting to me about that is when we think even a victory could lead to problems, right? We're playing a game of chess here. It's not just about defeating these 7 nations. We want to make the land of Israel habitable and calm and a beautiful place for Bnei Israel to live. And thus, what God is saying, I'm going to do it slowly in order that then the way that you are going to be able to live in the land of Israel will be easy. It won't be all of a sudden you deal with the problem number 1, which only brings about another problem. God will deliver them to you, throwing them into utter panic until they're wiped out. Their kings will be delivered to your hands. You will obliterate their names from under the heaven. No one will stand up to you until you have completely defeated them. Again, the command to destroy the idolatry. Don't covet their silver and gold and keep it for yourselves if it was for idolatry, but prohibit completely. Because this is this would be an abomination for God for you to be using the idolatry. Do not bring these abhorrent, do not bring something that's an abomination into your house. Or you will be like it. If you bring the abomination into your house, then you will have the same fate as what's supposed to happen to this idolatry. You must reject it completely because it is something that is forbidden. It is something that needs to be completely destroyed and completely wiped out. I would say that this chapter in many ways is a challenging chapter for contemporary, challenging for me to see the idea of just destruction to everybody that is around. You have to remember the Torah is a book for many thousands of years ago. But the rabbis understood this, and that's why they said that the mitzvah to destroy the 7 nations, this mitzvah of complete destruction was only relevant at that time. It's not something that we have today. It's not something from 1948. It's not something from 1967. It's not something from when Cyrus allowed the Jews under the leadership of Zerubbabel, which we'll learn about in a long time from now, to come back into the land of Israel. And again, and the basis of all of this is the idea of the covenant, the idea of the Brit. God loves the Jewish people. The Jewish people need to love back God. God needs to protect us, and we need to protect, therefore, the interests of God and set up the type of society that God would want here in this world as well.